I am allowed to publish scientific articles, but not really. So you will find most of my work in the grey literature, because that is what we are there for. And I think it's a very nice order that we have this presentation. I will tell you something about the Accelerate project that we are involved in, and what we do around the impact and societal impact of research infrastructures and ERICs. In the end, what we will have seen is that societal impact, it might not be evident what type of impact is expected, but also that each ERIC or research infrastructure can only be held accountable for some processes preceding certain impacts, and that might help in deciding what impacts are important. It's also, it might be nice to mention that I really continue where the last speaker left, so it's really as if that was very well thought of. So as mentioned, the Rathenau Institute deals with science policy issues, and therefore we are also involved in the Accelerate project. It's a different type of research infrastructures that are involved in the Accelerate project. It's all accelerators, so big physical instruments. The Accelerate project is funded by Horizon 2020. It deals with the long-term sustainability of large-scale research infrastructures. And we are involved in a task, or we lead a task dedicated to the development of a protocol for monitoring and assessing the societal impact of the research infrastructures. My background is in chemistry and in social studies of science. And I must say I have worked with social scientists and humanities scientists before in projects on impact. Every researcher, no matter what field, always says, no, but it's different with us. Researchers in the natural sciences, the research infrastructures involved in the Accelerate project, they are nervous regarding the assessment of the societal impact. It might be obvious for some reasons. The European spallation source is an investment of 1.8 billion euros. So you imagine that they need to come up with something. But also smaller organizations involved in the project, they know that they have to prove or come up with societal impact, and they don't know what it is. I've heard physicists say, well, those in the social sciences, it's easy for them, isn't it? That's policy relevant what they do. Same way as you say, oh, it's easy for them because they collaborate with industry. So we're all in the same, we're all finding out what it is. Now, when I work with impact and evaluation, that's what I do, I never understand why, when we talk about impact, it's always related to evaluation, and impact is also always related with indicators. There is impact, or impact should be important regardless of evaluation. I mean, impact is often part of, or I guess it's part of your mission, isn't it? So when I talk about impact, I know that there's always evaluation, I know that there's indicators, but just think of what is impact when we talk about impact. Now, if we look at the issue of societal impact, and it's been mentioned before, what are the issues when it comes to societal impact of research infrastructures? In the S3 report, they noticed that the definition of socio-economic impact presents difficulties. So impacts may be manifested in many diverse ways. You never know, so there's so many impacts possible from all the infrastructures. There's also many ways to measure impacts, and I never understand why we talk about measuring when we talk about impacts. I mean, I don't understand why we talk about impacts also only in the idea of evaluation, but then do we need to measure it? Or do we need to assess it, and do we have to find evidence? Evidence does not necessarily have to be quantitative, it can be qualitative as well. There is an issue with causality. So do you know that an impact is to be, is there a causal relation with something you've done? And then again, what the other speaker said as well, a one-size-fits-all approach is probably not the best way. but it is important to establish a set of standardized measures. Now, when we look at impact in general, they often become manifest in the future. And I really think it's important, with whether it's an ERIC, a research infrastructure, a researcher, a research group, a project, an institute, you're only partially responsible for an impact to happen, because we know that other actors play a role in an impact to become manifest. There are many uncertainties regarding the processes that leads towards an impact. So I work with physicists who have a research infrastructure, they do measurements, they understand their machines, they understand their equipment, and then we come in and we're going to develop this societal impact measurement device. And then they ask us, so what happens? What do we do? And if we do something twice as much, will we have, how much more impact will we have? And we say, we don't know. It's a social process, we don't know. But we need to talk about it. So we need to find a way to have a good discussion about it. Now, it's generally accepted, and that's what Jelena mentioned as well, that a model or a theory is useful. You mentioned the logic frameworks. For the actors involved, the scientists, the scientific organizations, the funders, the other stakeholders, to agree and discuss and to know what you talk about, to monitor, to try to understand. And I really think it's important, impacts relate to goals. And I see that in lots of policy documents when it comes to research infrastructures. And they say impact relates to goals, and when you want to measure impact, you need to define indicators that relate to the goals. And then I see a list of indicators and no explanation or understanding of how these indicators relate to the goals. So then I'm lost. So what we do is try to redesign everything again. Is there? Yeah. So now if I talk with the research infrastructures involved in the project and also with other researchers, when you think of what you are doing, then you get a very confused issue. There might be so many impacts possible in the future. When you start doing something now and someone uses your infrastructure and collaborates with someone else and with another scientist or with a policymaker in case of it, then that policymaker might, there might be all these issues happening in the future, and you never know what happens. So this is a process that you cannot manage, that you cannot be held accountable for. It's a big mess. So what we try to do is not start from the activities towards the impacts, but try to shift the way around and start with the end. And therefore I think it's also important to think, what is societal impact when we talk about impact? So what I mentioned before, research infrastructures, ERICs, can potentially contribute to a variety of societal impact, but it's not evident or given what societal impact to expect. There is no one in charge or no one with a stamp that says you need to get that impact or that is a good impact. So it is something that you need to discuss and decide on together. And when I talk about societal impact, I refer to everything but scientific. And that relates, for instance, to era priorities. It relates to the human capital that due to the use of research infrastructures, to innovation, to the economy. But when we talk about infrastructures in social science and humanities, and I see all the data and the databases and the long-term surveys, it should relate to policy, to democracy, society, culture. That is, I think, where we need to find your impacts. So some impacts are more relevant than others. And so where to start with finding what impacts might be expected from you or intended by you. And that might be somewhere maybe written down in statutes or in contracts or in desires by funders or in your intentions, your expectations, your visions, your mission documents. And I think it's important to talk about the impact because it's here and it's here to stay, but I don't think I need to mention it. So I mentioned you should start at the end. So this is an alternative way, but I heard you say things that I think relate to that as well. This is a theory of change development. So there you start at the end and you say, so if there is a societal impact, a generic one or a specific one, used by policymakers, what are preconditions? What is necessary to have happened before that impact to happen? And now when you think of the social science and humanities research infrastructures, that the results are being used by policymakers. So therefore the results have to be shared, and therefore results have to be there. So users have to be selected. And here you see in the beginning of that, in the lower half, you see where the research infrastructures, are active, where choices are being made, where processes are being designed, where staff is being hired, where a selection is being made of data sets or tools or whatever, with an eye of, I hope, potential impacts, because with an eye of your mission, with an eye of what you are there for to do, what you need to do, what you are expected to do, and what you intend to do. This is a theory of change. This is one way to find out how impact happens, because you think that all these preconditions are necessary. Yesterday, I was with my colleague at the CEREC-ERIC consortium, and we talked about this, and we said, do you recognize that you make these choices, and that when we talk about impact relating to use by industry, that there, for instance, the staff that you have is an industry liaison officer. But when you talk about impact relating to use or open science, that you do have this scheme for open access publishing. So the model that I show you there is like the skeleton. And that might be similar for different research infrastructures and for different types of impacts. When it is societal impact, you might have different services that you provide. You might have different users that you want to attract. You might have different schemes. You might have different outreach to specific user groups and different types of parts of your research infrastructure that you highlight. And if it comes to industrial impact, then the same type of skeleton helps, but you add on different things. And then you need to monitor, of course. So there are, yes, you monitor the number of users, but you also monitor or you keep track of changes in policies. And this is a way to try to understand and try to see whether an impact happens, but it's also a way, and we intended to do so, but I was really happy that our CEREC-ERIC contact said, I want to take this with me and discuss this with the directors of the research infrastructures that are part of it and see whether we can agree on whether this is what we are there for, and that we can agree on measures in between to see whether we progress. And there, it's more or less the basic of a narrative, a causal narrative. And you might find out that the causality is an issue. So therefore, you need to change your theory of change. Now, I mentioned something about expected and intended impacts, and I think that's important also. So some impacts are intended by you and are expected by funders, by stakeholders, and that's what you do. And as someone mentioned yesterday, there is an accountability ceiling. You are accountable to a certain extent, but there is at some point it goes out of your hand. So the accountability ceiling, the straight runs are what you are there for and what you are held accountable for. The number of people that have made use of your facility may be something else. The long shots are intended by you, but cannot be expected or defined in such a precise way. That might be specific cases of use that originate in your organization and that you have steered towards, but you couldn't predict that a specific ministry would change their policy because of the use of your database. But you did work in order to enable that. And when it comes to expected and unintended, and especially when we talk with the bigger physical research infrastructures, there's all this big equipment being built, so there's all these economic spillovers that might not be your core business, but you know that people will ask for it. So you need to keep an eye and understand how that happens as well. Final point I want to make, impact and governance are really related. So I don't talk about impact only in the eye of evaluation, but in terms of governance. So an impact is what a research infrastructure or an ERIC needs to achieve, is agreed upon. It's more than just the unintended consequences. It's a result of your governance as well, your vision, your choices, your organizational aspects, your activities, and that you can be held accountable for what you do, how you do it, for that process. And monitoring, that's analyzing, interpreting information in relation to the theory of change. And for that, you need evidence, information, indications. And only then can you start thinking of what type of information do I need. And the whole concept of indicators, that's the easy choice. Don't think of it. Think in terms of what type of evidence do I need in order to understand whether we proceed in a way, in a direction that we want to. I want to leave it at that. Thank you.